This podcast is brought to you by Fandom Spotlight. Check us out at fandomspotlight.com. Have fun and follow your fandom.
Anime, we have your attention, please, and welcome to a supersized episode of Dragon Ball for Life with a supersized introduction of the Dragoncall series. We're not going to talk too much because you know who we are. I'm Matthew Porter with my partner in crime, Troto Trav, because we have a white whale of an interview. Some may even say purple cat. Double entendre, don't ask me how. But enough from us. Trav, tell the people who our esteemed guest is today.
Man, you know who I am. You know me. I stay chillin', and I love thy women like Krillin. But
Krillin does love
our guest today woke up with a premonition about a podcast god. He spoke to the Oracle Fish and had heard of an urban legend. After hearing about this legend, he decided to visit planet Earth because there are two potential podcasters that might have heard about said podcast gods. On today's episode of the Dragoncall series, we do our best to impress the God of Destruction and see if we are fitting to be podcast gods. The most decorated and prolific guest we've had on to date. You might have heard him in One Piece, but you may recently know him for, keeping the balance of Universe 7. Without further ado, please welcome our guest, Jason Douglas, actor and anime extraordinaire, and also the voice actor behind our God of Destruction Beerus. Welcome, Jason. We are thrilled to have you today.
Wow, Travis. That might have been the most epic intro I've ever had on a podcast, any show of this kind.
We've been getting that after our intros, and I was hoping that to continue that trend.
That's amazing. Well, the problem, of course, is that you're going to have to live up to that like every time you have a guest on. So it's going to have to get bigger and better every time. Good. You're going to be like, oh my gosh, got to write another intro. Holy smoke, dude. You're going to be like,
so
damn.
It's funny you say that, Jason, because kind of like a running joke here on the podcast is when me and Trav have to like write something out, we're terrible at it. If a script's in front of us, like we'll fumble through it. But like when it's like freestyled, we'll like hit it first take.
Yeah.
But like the intros are like the one thing that we're like, all right, we got to stick this landing.
That's hot, man. Some shows, they just have your like bio and they just read it or they just list off things. And I'm like, sometimes I'm like, yeah, I did that. Wow. I don't know. Sorry.
Awesome.
Anyway, it's great to be here. No, this is great. I'm happy to be with you guys, and I'm happy to be back on. Obviously not this show, but this is my first time on this show. But I know you guys are affiliated with Fandom Spotlight, which is an awesome platform, and Captain Kyle and those guys. So I'm glad to see that the Fandom Spotlight empire is expanding, and with you guys at the forefront. That is awesome. Well done.
Oh man, we appreciate it. When we came into this, it was just like on our previous podcast that Matt and I, we'd go on to these little, like we say, our nerd tangents, and our two co-hosts were not as knee deep into the anime world as we were. So once Matt came up with this idea, I'm like, perfect. Like I can just talk about this freely whenever.
Here we are, man. Here we go. Hopefully it's the first of many, or I'm one of many that will be happening for you. So.
Oh, for sure.
We appreciate that.
You bet.
Y'all saw what I did with the white whale, purple cat. Y'all got that reference?
I was like, what do you call me?
Yeah.
No, I know the reference.
He said, wait.
For our younger viewers who might have not got the reference, had to walk them through it real quick.
Yeah,
no, man. I mean, it's funny because you had talked about just then about they'll just read off your resume, your page, and everything. But we just before we even get and started any of our questions, if you just want to just talk a little bit about your background and, because when I was looking, it seemed like you started acting at a very young age. And, was that something that you were always just passionate about, that you just, wanted to do for a living?
Well, let me dispel that just a little bit.
Okay.
Because folks have asked me about, like, you must have been really young. And when they look at, like, for instance, IMDb, they'll see a couple of titles that I'm associated with a date of like 1982. and I was like, I was like 11 or something in 1982. I wasn't acting back then. But what happened is I have over the years, particularly back when I was working a lot with the former ADV Films, they would get titles from the 70s and 80s that had never been licensed for dubbing or distribution outside of, Japan or whatever. And so we would do those. And then when they would end up landing on, IMDb, it would have the original, it would still have that date of, 1982 or 1984.
Movie magic.
So it makes it look like I've been at it forever. And, it does feel like forever, but not quite that long. My first anime was a show called Kimaguri Orange Road, Summer's Beginning. It was an OVA with ADV Films. And I think that it came out in 90, I think we recorded it in late 1998, and I think it came out the following spring or something. So prior to that, I was mostly a theater guy.
Okay.
And that was kind of my ambition. And I always thought that I would eventually move on into like film and television as well. Anime at the time was very, very niche. It occupied a very small space on the shelf, if you know what I mean. And most of the fans, if you can call them that, were more of like sort of cultural, like sort of Japanese, like cultural. They were really into obscure. I know one of the gentleman who founded ADV Films, he would talk about ordering laser discs from Japan that would have like 2 or 3 episodes of something. And so that's kind of where the fandom was in the late 90s. And
1000%.
Yeah. And they started, what ADV did, I think that was kind of, it was ingenious really, which was they were based in Houston. So they were not in LA or New York, obviously. And he started recruiting from local theater. So he wasn't going through agencies and getting people that were like voiceover guys or he was actually getting people that really maybe didn't have a lot of ambition to do voiceover or even film and television. They were just working in theater. And so they were very intelligent, I think, for the most part, and very expressive, thoughtful about character, and used to doing a lot of, work on stage and children's theater. And so these are the kind of folks that were originally recruited to become actors. And he kind of developed, I'm talking about Matt Greenfield, who was one of the main founders of ADV along with John Ledford. But they recruited what really kind of became like a company of actors. You didn't have 150 actors coming in and out of different shows. You had maybe 20 or 30 actors initially that really got a chance to kind of hone their talent working in front of a mic, for which for a lot of us, it was our first time to ever work in front. I mean, I did anime before I had ever even done like a commercial, radio spot, which is far more lucrative. And I do quite a bit of that kind of work these days. But before I'd ever done any of that, I spent probably, hundreds of hours doing anime, which prepared me very well for moving into like kind of commercial voiceover and corporate voiceover. So for me, it was a great launching pad. And even though I had never, initially most of us who started out in the late 90s, early 2000s just thought, well, this is just kind of a fun side gig.
Yeah.
It's never going to go anywhere. And then something interesting happened. Anime started attracting fans, and these small groups of fans grew into slightly larger groups of fans. And then they decided to meet together at their college and university. And then they started booking local small hotels, and these things, patterned after the kinds of major comic book conventions, especially like the Star Trek conventions, which were really popular in the I think the late 70s and early 80s and into the 80s and early 90s. These became the anime conventions that we all know about today. And I think that was a huge driver of the fandom. But for those of us that were there from the beginning, we've just kind of ridden the wave the whole way, and
ebbs and flows.
Yeah, sure. So it's a long way of answering your question. I certainly never set out to become
that's a great answer.
an anime voice actor or even a voice actor.
Yeah.
Really, and if you asked me when I was 21 what I wanted to do for a living, I would say, well, I'm going to be a stage actor, and I'm going to probably end up moving to New York, or maybe Chicago at some point, and just work the boards and maybe do the occasional film or TV spot. And everything's kind of twisted from what I originally imagined. So
No, that's awesome that you were able to
Totally
like
flipped on
stick
its
through
head.
it and see what it's grown to become today, because Matt and I will always talk about like just the excitement of discovering anime fans, because just when you were talking about in the late 90s of just accessing anime, I remember for me as a kid, I was good friends with my friend Tim. He was Korean, and he had these VHSs of Dragon Ball GT airings from Japan, and this was when I just got into Dragon Ball, finished up Dragon Ball Z. I would see pictures online of Super Saiyan 4. I'm like, wow, this looks what is
this
sick.
form?
So then I watched, the first two arcs of GT that were on the VHS. Did not know anything that was being said because it was in Japanese subtitles. There was nothing there for me to understand. But I just, from a visual perspective, I was like, okay, cool. And then as we got older, we just met more anime fans who were like, no, I watched this, but it was always kind of like a closeted thing. But now it's become supremely mainstream, which I'm loving.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I don't
don't think Cartoon Network gets its flowers for like how like instrumental it was like on like the Western side,
Honestly.
like in terms of like kids, like with Toonami and stuff like that. I feel like that was a lot of our, like obviously Trev, me and you, like, we were like into Dragon Ball Z, like especially if you watch like Fox, like wake 7 in the morning to watch the Garlic Jr. saga and
Always
stuff.
on.
So we liked it there. But then like when Toonami came on, and I guess like with Tom and the presentation, is like right after school, it became cool. Like, and they like kids in school who like were like really into sports. Right. And I'm like, oh, y'all saw Dragon Ball Z last night? Like, yeah, I saw it too.
So for me, like the after school stuff, and I'm a little older than you guys, but the after school stuff was like He-Man, Masters of the Universe, which was cool, or old reruns of like Bugs Bunny stuff. So they were aiming a little lower. I think they were trying to sell toys for one thing, but there's something about anime, particularly the stuff that was coming out by the time you guys were watching it, which is one thing. It was just generally more exciting. And a little more aspirational, I think. Like for some reason, I don't remember other kids really being inspired or wanting to be He-Man, but there was something about the way the stories are told and the way the characters are constructed that kids really identified with, especially Dragon Ball. I mean, I often talk about ADV because that was kind of my, and they were a big anime studio, and they as far as distribution for dubbing, and they did a lot to introduce, the West, if you will, to anime. But the other studio, which only had one main title at the time, was Funimation, and they had Dragon Ball, and they managed to get that, like you say, on I think Toonami, sort of the kids version, the scaled down. But that really planted a lot of seeds for what the anime fandom would become. And I still hear people at conventions when they talk about being kids and watching Dragon Ball, and now they've graduated on to, more Dragon Ball or other anime shows. And I think the big discovery, for a lot of anime fans, is just the idea that anime isn't just giant robots, or even, whatever Dragon Ball is, which is this kind of cosmic, almost Star Wars type story that is, it kind of is its own genre and defines itself in a certain way. But, realizing that, there's also these really cool sci-fi genre stories, or these other kinds of sci-fi, or not sci-fi, slice of life type stories. And then there's vampires, and then there's like literally just every kind of, people began to realize, well, anime, it's not really a genre, it's just a platform for many different ways of storytelling, and also as a gateway to a different culture. When you would watch anime as a kid, you felt that there was something different, little off. And part of that was just the cultural, you know, the ways that the Japanese writers were telling those stories. So you have a lot of kids that have grown up now and learning Japanese, going to school, and you know, identifying in many ways with like wanting to be. And for me, that was probably more like as a kid, London, Britain, because I watched a lot of shows like Doctor Who and other things that were made by the BBC. So I had an infatuation as a young person with all things, you know, England, UK, because a lot of those, you know, the settings and the plots and the characters were, you know, from that area. So it's interesting how that's changed.
Yeah. That point that you had brought up, I never really thought about it till you said it, like, because I have older brothers. I'm the youngest of like my siblings. So they grew up, you know, like He-Man, Masters of the Universe, right, you know, Scooby-Doo, Looney Tunes, Bugs Bunny. And that's actually like a really good point. Like, they didn't really like emulate those shows. It was just kind of like, oh, I'm gonna sit down, watch my show, talk to people about it, and kind of go on. But yeah, like the 90s, like we all wanted to be a Pokemon trainer. Like we all like, turned our hats backwards now, like because of Ash and stuff.
Yeah. You didn't really have even like when you didn't really have guys like you know, whatever, by the Castle of Grayskull, I have the power. Like you didn't really see a lot of, like there wasn't. How do you latch onto that? I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's a fun way, and I think Netflix has, you know, reinvented He-Man.
Yeah, they redid it.
I don't know. I haven't seen it.
Redid it.
But I loved watching that show as a kid. But it was mostly just cartoons were very just kind of afternoon it's what you did until it was time to go outside and kick a ball around. And it wasn't something that we were, you know, it was a Saturday morning thing. Like if you got up early enough, you could get your big bowl of cereal, like Calvin and Hobbes, and sit and, you know, eat in front of the TV. And then, but as soon as your parents were up, they were making you do chores, or they were kicking you out of the house.
Right. They took over the TV. They was like, they would definitely, all right, my turn, and change your channel. Like, but mom.
You know, in some ways it was good for us to have like other, you know, athletic endeavors or just going outside and playing. There was a lot more connection. Times are different, but for sure, I think the storytelling in anime is just across the board more sophisticated than what we were getting. And I think it's affected, I think it's probably fed back in this direction. I think animation generally is more sophisticated now than it was. You know, when you look at all of like the Attack of the Clones, the Clone Wars stuff, and all, you know, all these different animated, and it's socially acceptable. I mean, it's not like you're watching cartoons, you know, it's like, no, this is the format. It's like animated, an animated film, you know, it's not different. The question is just, is it good?
Exactly.
You know, it's not for kids anymore. I worry about what is for kids. If not,
that would you actually
what's left for the kids, man?
Right out of my mouth. I was gonna say, because the content creators have gotten so savvy, because it's like a kids show, but there's so many like 90 references in like cartoons now that like speak to like us as adults now. Like, I get that joke. Like, I get that reference.
My kids really dig Phineas and Ferb.
1000,
which is like I think one of the best animated shows. I mean, it's
a great show.
It kind of hits. It hits the same way. In some ways, it hits the same way like The Simpsons hit when I was coming up. I mean, Simpsons was a big deal when I was a kid, and I can't believe it's still around. But it has that same kind of smart humor where it doesn't pander to, you know, like it's literally for kids, but parents can sit there and watch it and laugh right along with it. I mean, it's nice. It's refreshing that there are things like that now, because there wasn't a lot of that stuff when I was a kid.
Yeah, there's a newer show called Craig and the Creek. I feel like I bring this up a lot on the show. That's like one of my daughter's like favorite shows. It's on like it's a Cartoon Network show, but she watches it on HBO Max. And it's like she'll be gone, and I'll like, let me put on Craig and the Creek. And then she's like, you're watching it without me? I'm like, I'm sorry, I got so caught up.
That's rule number one.
Well,
you can't be watching without
myself, As a parent myself, man. My wife and I, we always wanted our kids to have smart things to watch, and we didn't care if it was for kids, but it had to be intelligent. You know, I wasn't
stimulate the mind.
Yeah, I wasn't interested in those goofy, you know, just like you know, there are some things that your brain is itching. You're like, why? Like make something good, make something smart, make something that will challenge their mind. And I think in many ways that's what, I think that's what a lot of anime fans are drawn to, is they're drawn to the way anime storytelling can be kind of deep and imaginative in ways that sometimes live action struggles to be. And we all know live action versions of anime have mostly failed miserably.
Yeah.
And part of it is because the format itself kind of dictates that you can do certain things and that you can express a character in a certain way. Man, I don't know. I think in the Marvel era, maybe we can start to see how a Goku and all these characters could be portrayed, but they really are conceived, I think, from the ground up as animated characters. And so I think it's really hard to make that crossover into live action.
Yeah, especially from an aesthetic standpoint too, because like the designs and creations of these different characters are just so unique, where it'll be really tough to like try to emulate that in a live action format and have it still have the same effect as you were viewing it when you were watching the animated version.
Yeah.
And then not only that, I feel like every time they try to like take a shot at a live action anime adaptation, is they like try to be like, oh, if this were in the real world, what would it be like? Instead of just fully just diving into the lore. Like, no, just go all out. Like we know this is ridiculous. That's why we like it. Like don't make it like, oh, real world based Dragon Ball. Just go out there. That's why like I'm holding my reservations, but I feel like this One Piece show that's going to be on Netflix might be good. Yeah. Because it's like the set designs, it seems like they're going all in. Like, no, this is just One Piece as you guys know it, just with real actors. Yeah. Like, that's it. So we'll see.
I think if you commit, I mean, if you really commit to the world and the universe of the show, I mean, who knew when Peter Jackson did The Lord of the Rings that it could be so vivid? The writing, Tolkien's work is vivid enough, but we'd had like the Ralph Bakshi or whatever, the animations from the 70s, I think.
I remember those. I used to watch those in school, like the Hobbit.
Exactly.
Like, I remember those.
But the idea of bringing that to life, I'm sure somebody said, you can't. It's not manageable. In fact, I think they said it's unfilmable. I mean, there's just some things they said. I think they said that about Dune. It's unfilmable. You cannot shoot a film version of this. And I thought Dune was very good. So I think it's possible, but you have to have 100% commitment to the world that was imagined by the creator. Right. So, Frank Herbert or J.R. Tolkien or Akira Toriyama, right? Like what did he imagine when he started, writing these characters and inking these characters? Maybe something like that could work, but you could never pull off the hair.
That's
hair is second to none, man.
Yeah.
So you can try, but
a lot of gel.
But that's the point. That's a good metaphor for the problem, right? Think about anime hair. There's something about it, man. Think about Goku's hair. It's completely ridiculous. And if you show a guy on camera with that thing going on,
right,
you'll be like, what is that nonsense? His hair is as tall as his face, right?
No levels of bedhead is going to emulate that.
You got to scale it down, right? And that's the problem. These characters were conceived as larger than life, and the lines are just a little longer than they would be in real life, and the way they express themselves, they're very over expressive, and make big faces and those kinds of things don't play on camera. You just can't do it. You would say, God, that guy's hamming it up, man. He's like overacting. And what we would call overacting on camera is exactly what we absolutely buy it when it's an animation, when it's an anime character. We do. We buy it.
So that actually is kind of a crazy transition to like one of the questions that I did want to ask you, because obviously your pedigree is very well renowned and you've done more than just anime. Another huge fan show that you were on was The Walking Dead. Played Toby. You were in there for 26 episodes. I didn't know that.
26, yeah.
But it says 26. But so we've had a couple other voice actors on the show that have like done a bunch of different anime projects, video game voice actor and everything. And a common thread between them is that they kind of gravitated towards voice acting because they didn't like to be in front of the camera. Like, you know, voice acting or like playing to be somebody else, like allowed them to like break out of their shell, because they actually were very, very warm and welcoming to us. But they like, you could tell they were like naturally more reserved people. Yeah. But, like when they get in the booth, they can kind of shed all that.
Sure.
So you, as someone who actually does work in front of and behind the camera, like with on screen and voice acting, do you find that there's like a different headspace that you have to put yourself in, like when you're just like providing your voice to somebody versus like when you're like physically portraying a character?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Matthew. I know it feels different. You know, I can get out of my car after I park it. I can walk into the studio, say hello, maybe grab a coffee, and in 5 minutes I'm in front of a camera and we're recording. And there's very little time. Now, some actors might tell you they go do vocal warm-ups and do all this stuff. A lot of us don't, and I don't. I will clear my throat and kind of, you know, in the way, like on the way in the car.
Got the herbal
but I'm not
tea
really
on deck.
Yeah, sometimes.
The green
sure.
tea ready.
I mean, there is a convenience factor of performing. Now, that's not to say that we're lazy about it, because once we're in the booth, I think most of us are very serious about wanting it to be good. I mean, I've been working on. I was just cast as Kishibe in Chainsaw Man, and there's a lot of attention to detail there. And I'm a guy that I'm always like not wanting to move on quite yet, because I want to make sure that it's just right. And I have to really rely on the director. In the case of Chainsaw Man, we're talking about Mike McFarland, who is great, and trust their judgment. On set, it's a lot different because instead of being just maybe me and then two other people, the director and the engineer, there's 40 to 100 people watching that performance. There might be, on the inside the frame that you look at on your screen, there might be two people having an intimate conversation. But in reality, that scene is happening the camera and is surrounded by lights, equipment, cabling everywhere, PAs on walkies, the director, it's madness. It's amazing, but it's madness. And everybody's moving. There's all these moving parts. You got the lighting team, you got the sound team, you got the camera team, you got guys laying track, you got costume, you got wardrobe people coming in and checking your buttons because your shirt's not straight. You got people coming in, they're putting their hands on you. You got the makeup people,
grips,
they're patting you off. They're trying to get this sweat off of your forehead. They're combing your hair, your beard, your whatever. And it's just madness and chaos. Meantime, maybe these are new lines, you haven't seen them, you've got them in your hand. Your partner's right here across from you. You're kind of looking at each other. Are we maybe we're running lines while all this stuff is happening. And then there's this just like quiet on the set. The second AD, they brings everything, or the first AD, they kind of shut everybody up. And then there's just this calming action.
Then it's right to it.
And it's silent until you start the scene, and the scene happens. Boom, 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 and then you get to the end of the scene, and there'll be a pause. Maybe you keep acting a little bit with your actions, and then you'll hear, and cut. And then boom, it's chaos all over again. That's very different from working in front of a mic. And it's exciting as hell, and I love it. And so for me, I'm always trying to find the next job, and hopefully I make enough to pay my bills and support my family. That's at the end of the day, that's what we're all trying to do. And I'm not trying to be a celebrity. I'm not trying to be, a lot of this for me is very accidental. Coming on a show like this, and that that amazing introduction, Travis, but none of that was anything that I set out to achieve. I just wanted to be a good actor, and I wanted to make a living doing it. And a lot of things in my life happened by accident, and here I am.
Those are the best things, though.
That happen in life.
Those are the best
accidents.
When you stumble into opportunities, and it's just like you wake up one day, it's just like, how is this my life?
Yeah.
I love it.
Are there
what do they say? What's the line about success or whatever? It's when opportunity meets preparation
meets opportunity.
Right? You just got to prepare yourself. You gotta have a direction.
I speak in isms.
If you have no direction in your life, then you can't move. Right? If you're rudderless, you're just going to get tossed around. You got to have a direction, but you also need to be open about what can happen. Because most people that start out at 21 or 19 or 14 saying, I'm going to do this, with my life, that sounds great. Good for you that you have. But what I try to tell my kids and any young people that I meet is like, don't be so locked into that one idea that you close yourself off to other possibilities, because sometimes there's something much better waiting for you if you're open about, you can be moving in the direction of, if you think about it like this, a lot of people that work in the theater in particular, but also in film and television, started out at some point taking an acting class, right? It happens a lot. I mean, they just, what is this theater thing in high school? And they take an acting class, but they end up working on the crew or the set, and they feel like, oh, I really love building props, or I really love, or I really love directing. I like telling other people what to do rather than kind of being on stage, right? So it's a process of discovery. And particularly when you're in your, I would say, late teens to late 20s, that's a time of discovery, particularly nowadays for a lot of people. You don't necessarily have to have a single idea locked down, but you should prepare yourself. And I always tell myself, tell people, particularly if you're still in school, dude, hit the books, man, make good grades. Good actors are smart actors. And that's going to help you in ways that you can't conceive of now. Of course, telling somebody that's in school and struggling and is having a bad time,
right,
that's kind of hard to hear. It's like, man, I just want to get out. I just want to be out of this and be done. But, a lot of times when we close the door too young and say, I'm done with this, we close a lot of doors. You don't just close the door in front of you, but you close every door that was beyond that door, so anyway, absolutely. I don't know. That's a little too philosophical, probably.
No, I love every second of that, because like what you were saying about telling your kids, like about not being closed off to stuff. Like, me and Trav kind of like our credo, if you will. Like we say all the time, like all it takes is for one right person at the one right time to see something that we did, and it could completely change everything.
Right.
So it's just like you were just saying, like kind of just keeping at it and just pushing stuff up. Like even if the numbers don't always reflect, like what we think the content should and everything. Like if we just kind of like keep taking opportunities and getting ourselves in rooms with people like you, like eventually somebody who has the power to like help us propel this even more, like us getting in contact with Kyle and fandom and everything.
Sure.
That was just us just not closing ourselves off and doing everything. Because when me and Trev had worked on a previous podcast, that was like our thing. Like we were like our own bosses. Like we kind of didn't answer to anybody. And then coming with fandom and being able to say like, all right, this is a concept, but I know linking with fandom will pay dividends. So it's just like our idea under Kyle's flagship. It was like a very brief humbling moment where it's just like, all right, yes, we have a goal, but it's also part of a bigger project. So it's like we had to keep our stuff in line with his.
It's a chance to make it bigger.
Just came from
exactly. I've done very little under my own. I'm constantly. I'm here representing myself, but everything I've ever done that any of you guys know about has been, I've been hired to do it. Whether it's Crunchyroll, Funimation, Sentai, ADV Films, and that's just anime. I mean, Walking Dead obviously is AMC. I'm not produced. You're a lot of what we're doing. We do have to cooperate with other people to take it further. Now there are some enterprising people that are determined to be their own boss, and that's fine. But ultimately, you still have to pitch yourself and your project to someone else who's gonna fund it or or it's very rare. It's like, why do you think all these guys are going on to whatever the Shark Tank shows or whatever? Like you look at them, you think you've got this great idea, you could just take it and sell it, right? But no, every single one of them that go on that show is they're looking for a partnership because they want to take it further. That's the name of the game. It's not like DIY gets you so far, but ultimately, you've got to be somebody that can work with other people. And so when you were asking about television and film versus anime, I think a lot of that for me is just about being comfortable working with people from different different technical backgrounds, different genres. I mean, when you go to Walking Dead or any other show I've done, a lot of those folks are they may not be anime fans. They don't really, that's not really their language. They're not impressed necessarily by the fact that I do, they don't know who Beerus is. They probably have heard of Dragon Ball and they know that it's big.
They don't know anything,
but I have to not care. Like, I can't get offended by that. That's just them and their background. They got their nose to the grindstone working in their own corner of the industry.
Can't you just Hakai them out of existence if you want to?
Yeah, exactly. Hakai, how you doing? What? Did you cough?
Excuse me?
That's funny. Yeah.
So, JC, I feel like you really did your prep work with these questions because you keep saying things that are like walking us into another question. So I guess another one that I kind of want to go is sticking back with the Beerus, and like how you were saying, like some people like might not know who that is. It does seem like you've been like ingratiated in the anime world for quite some time. With Beerus coming into like the Dragon Ball Z universe, he was like for the most part, Dragon Ball Z, I wouldn't say stagnant, but they play it safe when it comes to like character designs. Like everybody pretty much is like, oh, that's a Dragon Ball Z character.
Yeah.
But with Beerus, he kind of was just like something that we've never seen before. Sure. Like it just in terms of like his look, the way he carries himself, a giant cat monster. So like when that movie came out, I know like his design was very divisive. Like some people were just like, I can't get into it. He don't look like a Dragon Ball Z character.
Yeah.
Where others was just like, oh, this is a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, of course.
Did you feel like an increased weight of responsibility to like provide the American voice or the English voice for that character, knowing like that it was such like a polarizing person for like the fans?
No, I had I really had no concept or knowledge that Beerus was controversial in that way. My sense at the time, and I won't pretend that I was a big Dragon Ball guy that knew the characters in the show. For me at the time, Dragon Ball was one of many shows that, were a part of kind of the anime world. And I think I knew it was a big deal, but I don't think I realized until after I started doing it just exactly what kind of big deal it was. And remember, when we did before Battle of Gods, and I had participated in, like, I had done King Cold for the Dragon Ball Z Kai, and I think I had done some off characters in a video game or two, but there had been no truly new Dragon Ball canon for like 17 years at that point. So in some ways it felt like whatever's Dragon Ball is really just maybe kind of, it's just kind of drawing out that old nostalgia rather than being something fresh and new and different.
Right,
and it
exactly.
feels like Mr. Toriyama, much like Beerus, kind of woke up from a 40-year nap, right? And had this amazing palette of new ideas. And I think that's what we owe Beerus and the whole idea of the multiverse within Dragon Ball. I mean, I don't know why he decided to do that all of a sudden, but I think most Dragon Ball fans, and certainly me, are grateful that he did, because it really reinvented the show in a way that I don't know has ever been done before. I mean, I'm just trying to think of the same thing. Taking a show that is like an old show and kind of picking up where it left off. Of course, you can do that, and you can do that with anime. You can't so much do that with television because actors age.
Right.
But picking up where you left off and taking it in a almost seamlessly new and amazing direction, and people are like, yes, this is what I remember, but more of it and deeper and more interesting, and sort of in every way. So I don't know. I was certainly grateful, and I know Ian Sinclair tells the same kind of story of just kind of he was a Dragon Ball fan, but it's a similar thing of like, hey, this is really great. Like it's an honor to be a part of this. And for me, I felt like at that point, I had been around for more than a decade, like almost 2 decades as a voice actor in anime, and had done a lot of titles that I really liked, but that were mostly forgotten. And was doing, the occasional like supporting role, lead role in some cases. I know my first role just to bring it full circle, my first role with Funimation, I think, was Trinity Blood, which I did with Mike McFarland. I played Wordsworth, and that was a major character, but it was a lot of these. You can do a major character in a kind of big show, and then the thing happens, and then it just doesn't really go anywhere. Nobody's really asking for your autograph on that picture. Nobody's asking you about that show. Maybe they saw it and they liked it, but they don't want to talk about it as much. And there are not a lot of shows like that from my early tenure, even though at the time they were big titles. I still do get some people that like to talk about Il Palazzo, which is a character I did for a show called Excel Saga, which is a very funny, wacky, really anime parody, and it's out there. You can find it. I do get people asking about that, but it wasn't until Dragon Ball, it wasn't until Beerus, to be honest with you. I mean, I thought I had done all there was to do, and it wasn't until Beerus came along that I kind of graduated to another level of the world of what it means to be an anime voice actor. I wasn't doing conventions. The only reason I do conventions was because I did The Walking Dead, and I had a good friend who named Lou Temple, who was also on the show, and he was like, "You should be doing these shows. People come out, and you get to meet the fans, and so I started doing Walker Stalker, and then slowly there would be fans at that show who would come up and want to talk about anime or have something anime related, and that was totally surprising to me, and then that just kind of evolved to where I'm now doing, I don't know, probably 6 or 8 events a year, but it's shifted. I get maybe 5 or 10% is traffic based on other things outside of anime, and the rest of it is anime related. It's a lot of fans of Dragon Ball, of course, but also fans of, like, you mentioned One Piece and Fairy Tail is a big one. Guild Arts, obviously, and I get a smaller share, but a decent chunk of people who are really into Borderlands, the character Krieg, that I do for that show.
Okay,
so.
And then it was interesting. As you said that you were going into it, weren't too versed in Dragon Ball, but was there a moment that you would say where you truly felt the impact of Dragon Ball and its fandom after you started working as the voice actor for Beerus? Like, was there a time where you're like, oh wow, like this this is a lot bigger than what I anticipated going in?
Well, for me, I think the big when we were promoting Battle of Gods, we did a promotional deal at New York Comic Con, and I think I want to say that was the show where we did a big event at Madison Square Garden.
Okay.
And it wasn't the entire arena, but the way they do it, where they block off like the half of the arena, and then you're on a stage, and the rest of it is kind of, fans in seats. And man, walking out at Madison Square Garden and just having it completely packed. But not only that, walking down the streets of New York City and seeing all the Gokus and like people in Dragon Ball costume, and then coming around the corner and there you are in Times Square, and like there's a huge Dragon Ball, scrolling on the electronic billboards, and then you walk into that the Javits Center, and when you walk into this place, it's like a giant atrium, with all the escalators and stuff. And there right in the middle is, I don't know if it was a Goku or it could have been a Shenron or something, but you see the size and the scope of the promotion that goes into it. but also just the commitment of the fandom. I mean, there's not a city that I've been to, there's not a show that I've done where there hasn't been, you know, at least a half a dozen guys in, you know, orange jumpsuit and like crazy yellow Goku hair,
just yelling down the street, screaming for no reason.
always, you know, and you know, he'll have a cute girl on his arm dressed as Bulma. Like, it's a commitment, like all the way around, like the whole crew
1000%
is Dragon Ball. That's when you see it. When it's big. I mean, some people like to dress up and cosplay as a character nobody's ever heard of, because if they do it well, people go, "Who are you? Where are you from?" And they go, "Well, let me tell you." You know.
Oh, thanks for asking.
Yeah. But there's no quicker way to find your tribe at a convention than to cosplay, because the fans of that show are gonna, you know, you're gonna connect with
1000%.
So
1000%.
At least that's what I've seen.
When I went to Anime Expo, I've been to like conventions in Philly, because, you know, Philly, for whatever reason, even though like we're a major city, they don't get like the large housed events.
I wish I got more of.
We're gonna fix that. That's our goal. We're gonna fix that. But when I went to Anime Con, that was like my first time being in a convention center, anime based stuff. And like you were saying, man, it was just like it's quite a spectacle to like take in. Like when you like see everything, and like the time, effort, and money that you could tell people like really put into their costumes and everything. It's just like, yeah, this is awesome.
Sure. Yeah.
This is awesome. And they had a Dragon Ball panel. I can't remember what it was for. I don't remember if it was the Broly movie.
Mm-hmm. Sounds around the time. That might have been
or Superheroes. It might have been Dragon Ball Superheroes, like when they were like announcing it and everything. Yeah. And then like Shane was there and everything. So it was just like, and it was like full, like packed and everything, just wall to wall, like you were saying. So it was just like me and Trevor saying, like when you get that moment of like just feeling so connected in a room full of strangers, like that's what anime is. Like it's just like we don't know each other at all, but we all love this common thing, and it's just like everybody's just so friendly. Like this is how the world should be all the time.
Well, we
like,
need
everybody's
that.
Just like, oh, you look great.
Exactly. We need more of that for sure. We need to like feel like, you know, it used to be, and for a lot of people it was sports. You know, you go watch a baseball game, it didn't matter whether you were a Republican or a Democrat, it didn't matter whether you were you know, what part of the world you were from. It's like, hey man, you know, you're rooting for the Phillies, you know, and even the fact, you know, I'm even a fan. I'm a baseball fan. I love,
me too. It's my favorite sport.
You know, I love my Astros because I grew up, you know, and don't hate, you know, but
I won't, y'all. We're Phillies fans, so we'll settle this.
We'll talk.
But you know, I can go enjoy a baseball game in any stadium in the country, and there's a certain kinship that you have with other people because you're there. But it's very, there's also something kind of generic about it until you start talking to people. But when you're at an anime convention, that's very specific, you know, and a lot of people, when you meet people at an anime convention, first of all, they're probably, you know, when I look around at the fandom, or the fans at the anime, there's a general, probably a 20 to 30 year swing, you know, in terms of age. It's not super spread out. But you know, you probably have a similar like way of like there are probably some similar life experiences there, and you just have to find out by asking each other. Even though you could go to a show in Dallas and as a guy from Philly and probably meet somebody from Sacramento, right? I mean, it's, you know, and still get on with them, you know, get along and have, you know, because you've got the commonality of Dragon Ball, but then you've got kind of like the life that you've lived around that and like why you were drawn to it. And so, you know, it gives us something, you know. I think we look for community, and I think anime is a way that a lot of people have found community. They've found friends, they've found, you know, life partners or whatever, you know, like they've found, and they're having fun doing it. And there's something cool about kind of a niche. Some people would call it a nerdy kind of you know, being able to be a fan of something and not be embarrassed about it, you know, and just be like, no, I'm into this, and here's this other show I'm into, and you know,
exactly.
So yeah, there's a lot going for it. And I think in terms of how we communicate with each other and how we relate to each other.
Definitely. And I hope this never leaves with the anime community, because despite how popular anime has become, I feel like all anime fans, when they meet a fellow anime fan, we all have that same reaction as if like, oh, wow, you watch it too?
You too?
And just fan out and just go in where the sports reference, you know, I can meet someone like, oh, you're an Eagles fan? Yeah, me too. You might, the conversation might not be as deep and thorough as when you meet an anime fan, because then you just start talking about the intricacies of different shows, what you're currently watching, what you're binging. But yeah, it's almost as if like even doesn't matter. It could be the most mainstream type of genre that you want to see. Everyone's going to still react as if like they're the only ones that are watching anime. So when they meet someone else that's watching it, it's the best thing ever. And you have some of the greatest conversations, I feel like, that come from that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then with football, like to go to your reference track, like with football, like if you meet a fan of a different team, it can get toxic.
Right.
It's not like I respect your team too, but like it's like, ew, why? But with anime, it's just like you can have a Dragon Ball fan, you can have a Naruto fan. It's still like, oh yeah, like all right, cool. I like that show too. It's not my favorite. It's not for me, but I respect your show. Like it's like, you know, you stick up for your show, but it's like you still like show the love and reverence, because it's like, you know, not everybody, like you guys were saying, it's a commonality. It's just like, oh, you too? Like, even though you don't like my show, you still like the fandom itself. I like that. Yeah. But yeah, with sports, it usually can get like, oh, if you're not sitting with us. Man.
Well, in anime, you know, you don't want to be, you know, if you're a baseball fan or a football fan, you're usually a fan of one team. You might be a fan of the sport and you could sit in any stadium and enjoy it, but you're generally a fan of one team. Whereas I think with anime, you know, you don't mind learning about shows that you don't know about. I mean, even me, I mean, I'm right there. You know, I'm oftentimes giving people recommendations of shows that maybe I've been in that they haven't heard of. And occasionally if I see somebody that I've seen before, like at a show, and they've watched it, they're like, oh yeah, that thing was great, you know. And so it is a way of introducing yourself to people, but also about learning what else is out there. You know, I don't know. The closest thing, well, we've had a couple of things, I think, in fandom that I hope aren't the rule. I mean, it used to be the big argument was about dubs versus subs, and you know, my thing is I don't really care. You know, as a voice actor, obviously, I think, you know, I hope people can watch and enjoy the dubs because we put a lot of effort into it, and the dubs aren't, you know. I think before ADV and before like that era of the early 2000s when it really started mushrooming, and before that, when you listen to anime that came out before that was dubbed into English, it was often not good. I mean, if we're just honest about it, it was often not good for various reasons. And it wasn't always because the actors themselves were bad. They just weren't given the time to make it good. And the studios themselves that were dubbing it weren't really trying to make it good. They just were trying to they needed to get it done, and nobody really cared. And they had a limited time to do it and not a big budget at all. And so it was not good for a reason. But that's changed and a ton, especially in the last 20 years. I mean, you know, David Matranga is a friend of mine. I used to work with him on the stage. He still works in Houston and in Dallas. He works at the Alley Theater in Houston. He's worked at Dallas Theater Center here in North Texas. I know he's worked elsewhere. I mean, in Chicago. And that guy's still doing anime. I mean, anime is, they are bringing some of their finest when it comes to like casting people and choosing the best actors they can find. And it's just very different than it used to be. And I think particularly in the era of simuldubs, when, you know, if you're watching something on simuldub, you're seeing it at basically the same time they're watching it in Japan. I think it's fair to consider your English cast as part of the cast, as part of that voice cast. And you don't have to read the subtitles while you're watching it. You know, I think that's the way most creators intended for their stuff to be watched. Lower down. Now, I'm a subtitle guy when it comes to live action. I've dubbed some live action stuff and I've enjoyed it, and I always try to do a good job. But if I'm watching it, I do want to hear the voices that are coming out of those actors' mouths. I got you. But in the case of anime, we're providing the voices, and it was the same for the Japanese counterparts. We're providing the voices for characters that are already there. So even though the Japanese actors, they typically tend to do prelay animation, so they're doing their roles without having to view it. But still, the character itself that you see on the screen is a contour, and if they can speak in a way that you can hear in your own culture and language, I think you're going to enjoy the show more. At least that's my opinion. But I think, people that are hardcore subtitle people, it's great. No arguments. It's whatever you want.
Yeah. Me and Trav usually say amongst ourselves, like, however we start a show is usually how we have to watch it.
Yeah.
Like if a sub comes out, I gotta stick with the sub, even if they dub it. Or if I watch the dub first, like I'll kind of torture myself, even though the sub has like way more episodes. I was like, I gotta stick here.
That's how it was with.
I think there's reasons to watch this. I think there's reasons to watch it in the original language too. If you really like, if you like some of the actors, like who they are, and you really like the way they perform the role, or if you speak Japanese, obviously. I think if you're learning Japanese and you really want to hear the language in that way, I think there's a lot of valid reasons. And if you just really hate the English dub cast, then fine, whatever. Don't watch us do it. But I do know I don't think anybody can say that we rush it, or that the English actors aren't as good as the Japanese actors, or that we don't have the needed experience. I mean, some of us have been doing this for 20 plus years. And have hundreds of titles, I think I've got a lot, but people like Monica and certain other ones have even more. It's astonishing. And
speaking of original voice actors, I just got to give the flowers to Masako Nozawa, the voice actress of Goku. She is 86-year-old and is still yelling at the top of her lungs, amazing. And you brought up a good point when you're talking about when Battle of Gods returned, and how we haven't seen too many shows that had such a long hiatus that were older shows that make a return. So it's really impressive to me for her that that not only did she come back to it, but comes back still as great as ever. So I'm a big proponent of giving people flowers while they're still here, because she is still killing it at an elite level.
Yeah. Especially if you think about it time wise, like us here in the States, we got Dragon Ball Z way later than what it actually was. So it's like she's probably been away from that role for years,
for a long time,
a really long time. Because the Majin Buu saga ended in 98, in real time, and we got it mid 2000s. So it's like she's kind of just been living life. It's like, oh yeah, sure. I'll put the gi back on.
Well, they've shown that they're very loyal. Obviously, in Japan, they're loyal to those actors, kind of owning those roles, and I suspect as long as she can show up to the studio and put her voice in Goku's, give life to that character, they're probably gonna have her do it, and I think it's great. I mean, it sounds weird. It can sound weird to me, a bit jarring, going from her performance to Sean's performance. And, I think Sean does a great job, and I think he's defined that character for the English language audience. And to me, he sounds like Goku,
when you hear him talk.
And even in real life, if you've met him, his personality fits Goku. In real life, his personality kind of fits the kind of manic, just energy that Goku has. So it's tough for me to imagine anybody else. And I know a couple people have, especially early on, but it's really hard for me to imagine anybody else kind of owning a character, I think, the way Sean does. I think we all aspire to do that, and kind of not own it because we have a right to it, but own it in the sense that so much of our time and energy is invested in that character. And Sean can, he can talk Dragon Ball lore and history and the nuances of the show as well as anybody. Now, he may not be completely caught up on where the manga is or something like that, because I know he likes to come in with a kind of a fresh idea, but
he said that in the anime con, he said that he doesn't read the manga because for that, he doesn't want to influence his performance.
Right. But he likes, like a lot of us do, to go in and just have some spontaneity about what's happening in the scene. There's only so much you can prepare. There's nothing like being in the booth, with the monitor on and the headphones on, and you're hearing the sound effects and the M&Es with, the music and effects from the show. And even in some cases, the other characters, if they've been recorded, and just kind of planting yourself in that scene, in that world. And that's what, that's kind of an experience that does happen on a set, is the idea of being surrounded by the set and in costume and sort of feeling like once you pull the character's boots on, right? And, and you look at yourself one last time in the mirror before you leave the trailer, that you are that character. And, I think in anime recording anyway, for the, the voices, I think that can't happen until you arrive, until you get in and the door is shut and the cans are on and the engineer hits play on the scene. Now you can really be in the scene as the character. So
yeah, absolutely. And that kind of leads to you did it again. You keep throwing us the oops to the questions. So,
my God.
In terms of the technical side, hey, look, I see, he's trained. So with the technical aspect, because doing the English version, you are providing a version, a translation of it, but everybody has like the source material, especially with like one of the big three, with like the Dragon Ball franchise. Is there like any room for you? Because at the end of the day, you're an actor and a performer.
Sure.
Like you got the pedigree. Is there any wiggle room they give you to like the source material, or just like, no, like these are the words that Toriyama wrote. Right. Read them, please.
Well, the words that the words that Toriyama wrote were in Japanese, and so that has to be translated. First of all, that's the first part of the job. The next phase is it has to be localized. It's not enough just to have a translation. You would be astonished at how bad the scripts would be if we just did the translation.
Done Google Translate.
It's not that, truly though. People think, just translate, just do the translation. No, believe me, you don't want us to just do the translation. And oh, by the way, if you're reading subtitles, you're not just reading the translation. It's a translation that's been localized into understandable regional English. So even then, the only way, if you're going to be a purist about what Toriyama wrote, the only way to do it is for you to go to school and learn Japanese and read them as he wrote them. So that's first of all. So by the time I get into the booth, a straight translation from the Japanese has been localized. So you've now taken the translation, the word for word translation, or the phrase for phrase, however they choose to do it, and you've written it in a way that flows. It sounds like natural language. It sounds like a script from any, that's the goal, depending on the skill of the writer. And then there's a phase of recording where you actually have to be in the studio, putting the words into the characters' mouths, and they don't always fit well. Sometimes it turns out that when you're actually, up to character energy and you're performing in a scene, that what's written isn't really ideal or what's adequate. So at that point, that's where your confidence as an actor kicks in, and you, along with the director, at least for me, I'm suggesting things. Someone that's just starting out is probably just waiting for the director to rewrite it and tell them what to do. For a lot of us, we view it as this is the final stage of really translating and localizing this for our audience. What we're not doing is making up new ideas necessarily, or coming up with a completely new, we're not changing, we're certainly not changing the motivations or the goals of the character.
Gotcha.
We're not trying to do anything that's kind of outside of what we understand the character to be. What we're really trying to do at that point is to say something that sounds natural, that sounds like something the character would say, fits with the translation, but also fits into the lip flap space that we have to work with. So that's kind of the final, that's what it's like to cross the finish line with a good sort of translation from Japanese to English. And if you're ever watching something in dub form and you're really enjoying the writing, and the performances and everything flows smoothly and it seems really AAA top tier. A lot of that credit belongs to the writer who took the translation to localize it, and then I think to the team that was in the studio at the time, and to the director in particular. Your director sometimes gets the same. Sometimes you'll find that your director, who's listed as the ADR director, is also the writer. But more often than not, it's a different writer. It's handed to a director, but then the director himself or herself is kind of the final gateway of what works. And there's a lot of writing on the fly. But it's not an improvisational thing as much as it is a doctoring, to try to make it work,
Gotcha.
To work well. And sometimes we'll have a good idea. There was, I think I've told this before, but at least with Beerus, when he's in that scene with, I think it's the Zamasu scene when he says Hakai, kind of for the first time officially. There was a question of what would he say there because it just translates to destroy. And I knew that it was important for the characters. I was hearing from the fans already, is Beerus going to say Hakai? And I was like, well, yeah, let me talk about that. I was talking with Chris about it and Chris Sabat, obviously. And anyway, we were talking about like, hey, this needs to be his phrase that he, first of all, the fans are expecting it, but also that's what it should be. Like he should have his thing that he says, Goku says Kamehameha, like you have certain things and it just lands well. And we don't need to translate Hakai. When Beerus says Hakai, he means Hakai, man. And we all know what that does. That's devastation. It's destruction. It literally translates destroy or destruction, but we don't need to, we lose a little of the emphasis if we just say the translated word. If you listen to Dragon Ball Super up to that point, there's actually a couple of times where he's used the phrase, or if he's used the destroy word, where if you listen to the Japanese, he actually says Hakai, but he's saying, I will, if they don't do what I want them to do, I will Hakai them, and in the translation, we said destroy because it was appropriate. And I think it was appropriate to introduce the word the way we did at the time that we did. So now, sometimes we'll translate, he might say destroy because it fits in the flow of a sentence. But when he puts that hand up and he's about to formulate his destruction, he's going to say Hakai.
That was a monumental moment. I remember just heading into that episode, just different YouTubers I follow that cover the show and just the community in general. That was the big question. They're like, is he going to destroy Zamasu or is he going to say Hakai? And, just to kind of piggyback off just your work with the voice actors, and what is the process behind developing that chemistry with not just Sean, Chris, but also Ian, because you and Ian are tied to a hip in the show. So how do you go about generating that off-screen chemistry that just flows so well when the show airs?
Well, luckily with Ian, I do feel there's a bit of chemistry there. And it's first and foremost because I really like Ian. I just think he's a great dude, and I always have fun hanging out with him wherever we happen to be. We don't record together, obviously, on the show because we all record individually. So the chemistry comes from, in some ways, if he's already recorded, there's just a comfortable blanket familiarity. Like it would be the same with Monica Rial, other people that I've worked with. Like, oh, that's a friend. That's somebody I know. It's not somebody whose voice I don't know. And there's a familiarity there. I also worked with Ian on a show called Black Butler. He directed this. I don't know if he directed the first season. I assume he did, but he definitely directed the second season. And I had a huge role in that, played Claude in Black Butler too. And that's when I worked with Ian for the first time. And so Ian and we developed a rapport, and I realized he was a terrific director because he's an actor first and foremost. And he kind of spoke the actor's language. And I think the performance, if my performance was good in that, it was as much because of working with Ian and his ability to coax out of me, things that are there, but you don't always, and so for me, that's where chemistry comes from. It comes from knowing somebody and spending time with them. Chris, to some degree, I had some chemistry with, just because I'd worked with him at Okratron on other projects. Sean, I really didn't meet until I started doing promotional stuff for Dragon Ball, Battle of Gods, etc. I just had not met him. I'd like to think we hit it off. We always have fun and interesting conversation, and then he goes his way. So my job though mostly is to just show up and be in the scene. I get thrown into shows where I don't know anybody, and I still have to create for that character, and fill that character. So, I'm doing. I think I mentioned Chainsaw Man right now, and there's a lot of new faces and voices that I haven't worked with. And I'm still trying to. I need to be that guy for them. They haven't worked with me. I don't want them to feel intimidated. Right. But the fact is, they've got their work to do, and I've got mine to do, and hopefully, it all blends well, in the mix. So.
I've always been interested because I hear the different voice actors we've had in have all pretty much, talked about like their isolated recording sessions and everything. Is that like a post-pandemic thing, or that has that always been like everybody just records and sends in? Like, is there ever like group sessions? Was that ever like a thing where like if it's a group scene that everybody comes in and like does it together? No, because I always think of like those Disney promos where they like show the actors in the room together recording. I was like, have they been lying to us this whole time?
The difference, Matthew, is that in Disney shows, we're talking about pre-lay animation, so they do bring the actors in as part of the process early on, and they're just reading their lines. Really, they're performing their lines from the script. What we're doing is we're trying to track our performance to animation that's already been produced.
Gotcha.
So we come in later. Even with Disney though, they weren't always. A lot of times when you see those promos and they're all acting together. Yeah, well, they did that for the promo. In fact, most of the time they're bringing in actors.
Scandal.
Yeah. So we are. When I started out, it was going into the studio. By the way, we're still going into the studio. A lot of the remote recording that we were doing during the height of the pandemic stuff has gone away. Still sometimes happens, but it's not as much. Crunchyroll has been very particular about wanting to bring people into the office, so to speak. Yeah. Your only time that you really get these group sessions are in what I think some people call Foley sessions, or I don't remember the words they're using for it, but they're doing it to save time on these group scenes where and I don't mean individual, but like when you have lots of background happening. Let's say you're in a canteen or a bar, you've got lots of just jibber jabber. Thanks, Mr. T. Jibber jabber going on. And a lot of times they can save some time by having maybe 4 actors in the studio on 2 mics, and just all at the same time. It's characters walking down the street. There's a lot of action going on. We just want to fill that, with something that, when you building that soundstage, if you've ever watched the extras on a movie, especially like Lord of the Rings, where they really get down to the nitty gritty of like, of sound design, it's fascinating, and you can really make an experience richer by building up the sounds to really make it sound like there's life going on and there's a richness. And they didn't really used to do that, but I think there's more of that now that you see.
No, I will always tip my hat to voice actors, because I've done some like offshoot things that'll probably never see the light of day. Yeah. And I've had to do like ADR for my own stuff. Yeah. I hated it. Yeah. I hated it so much. And that was just me just trying to catch my lip moving for things that I said myself. And I was like, this is the most stressful thing I've ever did in my life.
Well, one secret on that is if you've got another character and you need to fix your lines, just cut to the other character. And they can be hearing you say it instead of you being on screen saying it with your mouth. Do you know what I mean? So
I didn't have the juice to tell them to do that. I was like, hey, why don't you just make this a one shot and I'll just say my lines.
Well, if you're talking about anime, you got no choice. You just got to make it work. One of my favorite stories from Robert Rodriguez's book, Rebel Without a Crew, is the way he recorded his audio, which is, if you've never seen El Mariachi, You definitely should. It's a seminal kind of independent film, small budget, made for less than $10,000, went on to Sundance, it launched his career. But he was shoestring budget. He was behind the camera. He had like one or two other people helping him out, and that was it. And, he would have the camera on characters, but he had no way to record. He just had a camera. He didn't have like proper recording equipment. So he had a tape recorder with him that sounded good, but he had no way of syncing it. So he would have them do their scenes and it would be silent. I mean, they would say their lines, they would perform exactly as you would, but then after he would say cut, he would immediately go up to them with the tape recorder and say, okay, do the scene again, just like you just did it.
Oh, wow.
And then he found that like 9 out of 10 times it would mostly line up. And if it didn't line up, he said, usually it lines up pretty good at the end, but then or at the beginning, but then as the character continues to speak, it starts to get off track. So what would he do?
Right.
He would just cut to the other character. So the character starts speaking here, and about midway through, he cuts to the other character in the scene who's just listening and watching.
Who's listening?
And it would work. So you have a lot of scenes like that in El Mariachi. There's a lot of little tricks, but we can't do them, in anime because we're working with what we've got. We've got to match the picture that's already there. So I've got like almost no time left. So if you guys want to maybe ask your last question or wrap it up, that'd be awesome.
I was going to say.
So we're going to get this one in because it's from our wonderful executive producer, Yali. She wants to know if you have as much of a sweet tooth as the character that you play.
Oh, man. Yeah. For me, it's not a sweet tooth. It's more of a savory tooth. I do love to eat and I do love trying new things. I love to enjoy food when I can, and so I appreciate the craftsmanship that goes into a really fine meal, and I'm I have a bit of a fanboyism of just the restaurant industry in general. I worked in catering and restaurants back in my early 20s. And a lot of fine dining stuff, and while I was still in college and doing theater and stuff, and so I have a big appreciation for that, and anyway, I just I do appreciate it, not in the way Beerus is able to enjoy it. He doesn't have a problem kicking back probably 40,000 calories a meal. I can't do that.
It doesn't gain weight.
Anime food looks amazing.
But it is funny though. It's something about anime doing a session when there's a lot of food on the table and they're all enjoying it. Like you're like, when am I going to go eat lunch?
I get hungry after seeing this every time.
Oh yeah.
Well, and I'm about to go get some ramen right now.
Ramen, anything like sushi. I mean, I remember when I first started, I remember doing some shows and. We would all break for lunch and we would go have sushi or we'd go to have pho or, ramen somewhere. I mean, I don't know why it seems silly. We're a bunch of guys in Texas and we're just recording, but yeah, we would. And it seemed appropriate, I don't know, staying in character maybe. I don't know.
The final question I just want to, it'll be quick.
I know.
Whether you get it directly or you see it on your Twitter or whatever, but if you got $1 for every single time someone asked you, when is the Dragon Ball Super anime returning? How rich would you be? Are we talking Jeff Bezos rich? What are we talking about?
1 billion dollars. No, I will just say this. There's not a show that I go to where I don't get that question.
The age-old question.
And it's always charming. They always have a smile on their face. I don't know that anybody asks me that and thinks that I can actually give them an answer. I think they just, it's like, I feel like they're just putting it out into the universe and feeling like if we ask it enough, it'll happen. And in some ways, maybe they're right. I mean, if you do as a fan ask enough and there's enough interest, not that I can do anything about it, but there is this idea of just, if you're a fan out there and you really, really, really want something to happen and you're willing to support it, and we see that with the numbers. I think the movies have been a big deal for the franchise. Mm-hmm. It's the movies that have signaled, hey, we can go make a series. Hey, we can make another video game. Hey, we can keep investing in this manga and in this storyline. Because when you do the movies and it's like blockbuster numbers opening weekend, that gets everybody's attention. It's in Variety. It's in Hollywood Reporter. Those are like, you know, those are LA eyeballs seeing that going, anime. We thought that was just some other, you know, we have to take this series seriously. And now you have Netflix, right? That has, or at least had, I don't know where they are these days, and they've made a bunch of cutbacks, but they kind of started really promoting anime and investing in that area in ways that have been very helpful. You know, so, you know, I think you're right to wonder, and you might not be asking somebody that can actually tell you anything or even do anything about it, but you should keep asking. You should keep talking about it, because I think I think it is going to happen. I'm just going to tell you straight up, and that's not insider information. I just think it's coming, because we got through Broly, we got through Superhero. We nailed down, you know, we finished. There was a couple of games that are nailed. Like, what's left? Like, what's next? I guess it could be anything, but I just feel like we're about to learn, you know, that it's going to be sooner than we think. That's my intuition and my optimism that I hope to leave with.
We're rolling.
Well, Matt will take us away. Jason, thank you so much for joining us and taking time out of your schedule. You know, it's a busy time with the cons going on, but we just love doing this. We love speaking to new people, and you've just been added to our Dragoncall list, and we cannot be more grateful.
Thanks, man. I appreciate being on with you guys. You guys are great interviewers, by the way, and I really hope you guys stick around and keep doing this. And I hope that, you know, I'll have a lot of colleagues that will come on and join you guys to talk about Dragon Ball or whatever else. There's a lot of great shows that you can talk about outside the Dragon Ball world, of course.
That's the goal.
But yeah, this has been fun. So.
No, and that is that comment means a lot to us. Like we can't we would take up way more of your time to express to you how much that means.
No worries, man.
We've been working really hard at this, so like that validation, we greatly appreciate.
Well,
that.
I love that you guys are fans, and you're fans, but you're also being professional about it. So that's super cool, and you got good questions, so that's great.
Thank you, right. thank you so much for that. But as always, thank you so much, Jason, for joining us. My brother Trav, the lifers out there. This has been a very successful episode of the Dragoncall series here at DB4L. And like we always say here at DB4L, whether you watch it or you read it, we all need it. So follow your fandom right back here, and we will see you next time on Dragon Ball for Life. Dodon Ray.
Shout out to Super. Shout out to Yali.
Mortals, listen up. It's your God of Destruction Beerus here. Subscribe and follow the Dragon Ball for Life podcast, or else you shall be erased from existence. Hakais.